Hi, I'm Jilly G. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to show you my rice pudding recipe. Gluten-free, of course, which all of these ingredients are gluten-free already. This is my great-grandma's recipe, and really not very many ingredients at all. Although it does take a little bit of preparing ahead, which first thing I'm going to do is turn on my oven to 350, and then I have a big pot of water here. I'm actually going to turn on to about high. We want this to get really warm. There's a lot of different recipes for rice pudding, and this is one where you already have the cooked rice. You could even make your rice the day before. And this is 1 cup of rice cooked in 2 cups of water with a big pinch of salt. So it's ready to go. I've got 1 cup of raisins, some honey, some vanilla, a little bit of nutmeg to sprinkle on top, eggs, and 1 3/4 cups of milk. And because this is kind of like a custard, we are going to cook it in a water bath. So the first thing I'm going to do is get my 4 eggs cracked and into this bowl. There's all 4 of my eggs. Get that out of the way. And I want to mix these eggs up first before we add in everything else. It's really such a simple, delicious dessert. One of the things I love about a rice pudding is you can eat it warm or cold. And there's so many different recipes for rice pudding. You can put it in a crock pot. You can just make it on the stove top in a saucepan. I really like this version where it goes in the oven. Of course, if you've been watching this channel for any amount of time, you'll know that I don't really like raisins. But that's the nice thing about making a recipe like this, is I can share it with people that do like raisins. So in goes my milk. And this is something you could use with a non-dairy milk. I haven't actually tried it, but I think something like a coconut milk or an almond milk would actually be really delicious. Even a rice milk, and then you'd keep going with your rice theme. So once the eggs and the milk are mixed together, I've got 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and then just a 1/4 cup of honey. And this would actually only be a 1/2 cup of sugar. But I imagine you could use whatever sugar or sugar substitute you would like. Brown sugar would probably be delicious, or even just honey with a little bit of molasses. Of course, regular sugar if you're using sugar. Coconut sugar would work as well. All the possibilities. And because I'm using honey, I do want to just make sure that the honey starts to dissolve a little bit in my milk and egg mixture before I stir in the rice and the raisins. Rice pudding is also one of those recipes that you could make it differently every single time. You could add different dried fruit, you could add fresh fruit, cinnamon, whatever flavorings and spices or fruit that you like. And that really changes up a really simple dessert into something different. And I personally don't see anything wrong with eating something like this for breakfast the next day. A lot of the same ingredients that you would put in oatmeal. So why not? So once that's all mixed together, I'm going to switch to my spatula and dump in my rice. Again, this is 1 cup of rice that is cooked in 2 cups of water. And because I cooked this with a really big pinch of salt, I'm not going to add any salt to this mixture. So just dump this in. I said dump it in, but very carefully so it doesn't splash everywhere. And give this a really good stir. Break up any big chunks of rice that might be stuck together. Now for my raisins, dump those in. And again, give it a really big stir, breaking up any big chunks of raisins that might be stuck together. And to make this recipe even more simple, I could have just mixed all of my ingredients in my casserole dish to begin with. And then you would have less dishes to wash. But that's all right. This recipe works really great if you have some leftover rice from your dinner last night. So once you've got that all mixed up, bring over our pan and our casserole dish. And this is just a 2-quart casserole dish, and then a big 9x13. Actually, this one's bigger than a 9x13. This, if you saw my flan video or flan video, This is the same casserole dish and pan that I use to do a water bath. They just fit perfectly together. And then we'll just very carefully pour this in. And that's all there is to this pudding. I'm just making sure that the rice, they do settle to the bottom, but I want to make sure that it's mixed around a little bit. And then I've got some nutmeg here. I don't even have an exact measurement, just enough to sprinkle on top. And we're all finished, even before my water is boiling and even before my oven is preheated. We are ready to go. And if you're really fancy, you have an actual nutmeg that you would grate on top. I don't have any whole nutmegs, and I don't have a grater that would work for a nutmeg. So this is what I use. So my water's not up to a complete boil. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be a complete boil, just a really warm, almost boil. And then I'm just going to pour in enough water to go about halfway up the sides of the pan. Get your hot pads because these aluminum pans really do get hot. And now that my oven is ready, we'll go in the oven for about 30 minutes. And while my rice pudding is in the oven, I wanted to show you the exact same recipe that is different. So it's not the exact same recipe, although I'm going to use my same dirty dishes. But it's the same equivalent. I've got 1 3/4 cups of milk, 4 eggs, 1/4 cup of honey, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, again nutmeg for sprinkling on top. Except this time I have 1 cup of cooked millet. And the millet was cooked the same way as the rice. 1 cup of millet, 2 cups of water, and a big pinch of salt. And this is something you could also do the day before. And then this time I've got some different things I'm going to add in. I've got about 3/4 cup of chopped dates, 3/4 cup of chopped pistachios, and then about 1/2 cup of coconut. And this is shredded coconut, but it's unsweetened. And I'm going to do the exact same thing, mix it all together the same way. And then I've got a different casserole dish here. So as soon as my rice pudding comes out of the oven, I can just put that casserole dish right into the water bath and it's already ready to go. And I just wanted to show you that rice pudding is so versatile, you don't have to use rice. You can use millet in this case that I'm doing. You could use cooked sorghum, cooked quinoa. All of those work really good, but it all works the same and they're all delicious. And you can really add whatever you like to mix in. And same as before, mix up my eggs, pour in my milk. You could probably substitute half and half for this as well. Or even go full on heavy cream all the way. And that would probably yield a much thicker custard for your pudding. 1/4 cup of honey. You could also use date sugar and keep going with your date theme. But I really like the flavor and texture that honey gives this custard. And same as before, mix my honey around. Don't forget the vanilla. So now in with my millet. And you can see already that the millet breaks apart much easier than the rice does. And it actually makes this mixture look a lot thicker to begin with. Now for my 3/4 cup of chopped dates, all in there. Chopped pistachios and my coconut. So now that this is all mixed together, I'm going to pour it into, I think this is also a 2-quart casserole dish. Very carefully. And then all I have to do is just sprinkle on some nutmeg and wait for my rice pudding to come out of the oven. So what we're looking for is the custard to have a knife go in the center and come out clean. It is getting set. It's not so jiggly, but when I stick a knife in the middle, it's still coming out pretty liquidy. So I just keep going in 15-minute increments and checking it again to see if it's done in the middle. Of course, I don't want it to be 100% done. Then it might be too firm when we want to eat it. So even though the very center of my rice pudding is still a little bit custardy, I am going to pull it out of the oven very carefully. And while I've got the oven open, I'm going to put my next millet pudding right into the water bath. And then I'll set the timer for 30 minutes. Even though my rice pudding took about an hour and 15 minutes, I start checking it at 30 minutes. You never know. Everyone's oven is different. And then I put that on a towel to get the water. But you can see here where I've tested with a knife on either side, and then of course in the middle. And you can see it's really not jiggling at all. And I suppose you could serve this now. It's really hot. The millet pudding is a lot firmer than the rice pudding, so I don't think it will take as long. But my rice pudding is really solid now. It's still pretty warm on the bottom, but it sure looks good. My millet pudding is done. Very carefully with a pan of hot water. And then I just put it on a towel just to dry it off a little bit. And even though it looks a little watery where I put the knife in, my knife did come out clean. Okay, now as soon as this one cools off a little bit more, I can taste both of them. They sure smell good. Again, with a recipe like this, you might not think of a warm rice pudding for a summer dessert, but once they're cooled off and you put them in the fridge, they are delicious the next day. Now that my millet pudding and my rice pudding are cooled off, I'm going to taste them. We'll start with the millet pudding. Do a little switcheroo here. My millet pudding is a little bit more, I wouldn't want to say on the runny side, but it's not as firm and solid as my rice pudding. Of course, the rice pudding has had more time to cool off. And then, of course, once you put both of them in the fridge, they do get firm like this. If you like a runnier, oh, I don't even want to say runny. If you like a rice pudding that is more soft, more custardy, then you could just add in a little bit extra milk, and that would result in a runnier rice pudding. But because the milk to egg ratio might not be the same, it might not set up as much. But they sure look good and smell good. And I'll even try a little bite with a raisin. That's really good, even with the raisin in there. It's not an overly sweet dessert, just the right amount of sweet. Of course, the raisins add some sweetness. And even though it looks pretty firm, it's actually a really soft texture. Let me try my millet pudding with my dates and pistachios and coconut. I know it sounds like there's a lot going on, but I really like all of these flavors together. The funniest thing is I'm tasting a lot of coconut flavor, which coconut is kind of a strong flavor, but so good. And if you've ever had millet before, you'll know what the texture is like. It has almost the exact same texture as the rice. Of course, you can tell it is a little bit different because the rice is a different shape than the millet. But flavor-wise, the millet's not a really strong flavor, so it works so well in something like this. Especially if you don't like rice or you maybe can't have rice. Millet is one of those ancient grains that's really a good source of protein and other things like that. I like to think that rice pudding is something for everybody. You can make it any flavor that you want. Any dried fruit, any kind of sugar. Really so delicious. Really good hot or cold. Well, I wouldn't say hot, but at least warm. And if you feel like you've overcooked your rice pudding and it's too firm, you could always add a little bit of extra milk or cream to thin it out if you feel like it is too thick. Both of these only have 1/4 cup of honey. Again, the recipe calls for 1/2 cup of sugar, or to taste. If you like a rice pudding that is on the sweeter side, then add more sugar. I really like that I can keep the sugar content or honey at a lower level and add in something sweet like dates or raisins, and that brings another sweetness without adding more sweetness to the overall dish. And then the other flavors can come through. But really so good. I'll even take a bite of this one again. And it's so interesting tasting them side by side. The rice is definitely softer than the millet, but both delicious. Let me know if you make this recipe and what you think of it. Let me know what you like to put in your rice pudding. But thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have any questions or comments, let me know, and I'll see you on the next one.